What are you doing here? Billionaire finds Black Waitress crying at his son's grave. The cemetery was empty except for her. Emma knelt in the damp grass, her black apron still tied around her waist from the morning shift.
Thanks,
She'd come straight from the diner without even changing, because some days you can't wait. Some days the weight just becomes too heavy to carry alone. Her fingers traced the name carved into the cold marble. Daniel Morrison, beloved son, 26 years old. Gone too soon. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until a voice, deep and startled, broke the silence. What are you doing here? Emma's heart jumped. She turned to find a man in an expensive coat staring at her, his face a mixture of confusion and something sharper, suspicion, maybe, or grief that had hardened into walls. Her voice caught. How do you explain to a stranger why you're crying at their son's grave? Where are you watching from tonight? Emma's mornings always started the same way. 5:30 alarm. Hot shower if she was lucky and the building's water heater cooperated. Then the walk to Miller's Diner, where the coffee was always brewing before the sun came up. She'd been working there for 3 years now, long enough that the regulars knew her by name. Long enough that she could pour Mr. Henderson's black coffee before he even sat down, or know that Mrs. Chen wanted her eggs over easy with wheat toast, no butter. It was honest work. Tiring work. But it was hers, and most days that felt like enough. She'd met Daniel Morrison on a Tuesday afternoon 6 months ago. He'd walked into the diner looking lost, wearing jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than her rent. But he didn't act like money. He'd sat at the counter, ordered coffee and pie, and when she'd asked if he was okay, he'd smiled, really smiled, and said, "I am now." They talked. Not about anything important at first. Books. Music. The way the sunset looked different in the city than it did from the mountains. He came back the next day. And the next. Always sitting at the same stool, always leaving her tips that made her cheeks burn with embarrassment and gratitude. "You don't have to do that," she'd told him once. "I know," he'd said simply. "But your smile's worth it." Emma had never had someone see her that way before. Not the uniform or the name tag. Just her. They'd started meeting after her shifts, walking through the park, sharing stories about dreams they were both too scared to chase. Daniel wanted to be a photographer, not a businessman. Emma wanted to go back to school, maybe study literature. They'd both laughed at how impossible it all seemed. Then one morning, Daniel didn't show up. Or the next day. Or the next. When Emma finally worked up the courage to search his name online, her world tilted. Local businessman's son dies in car accident. The words had blurred through her tears. She'd never even known his last name. Never knew his father owned half the city's real estate. Never knew he was dying inside despite that smile he always wore. She'd found the cemetery. Found his grave. And she'd been coming every week since, bringing flowers she could barely afford, talking to him like he might still hear her somewhere beyond the silence. She hadn't expected his father to be there. Hadn't expected to be caught. "I asked you a question." The man's voice was harder now, protective. "How do you know my son?" Emma stood slowly, brushing grass from her knees. Her hands were shaking. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. I knew Daniel. From the diner where I work." The diner. He said it like the word didn't belong in his mouth. "My son didn't go to diners." "He did though." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "Every day for months. We talked. We were friends." Something flickered across the man's face. Doubt, maybe, or pain he'd gotten good at hiding. "My son had friends. Real friends. I would have known about you." The words stung more than they should have. Emma knew what he saw, a young black waitress in a stained apron, probably lying for attention or money. She'd seen that look before, in different faces, different situations.
There you go. Let me know if
It
you need
never
anything else.
stopped hurting.
Thank you.
"I'm
That's very
not
kind.
lying," she said quietly. "He told me about you once. Said you wanted him to take over the family business, but he wanted to travel. Take photographs. He showed me pictures on his phone. Mountains, oceans, street corners in cities I've never been to. He was talented. The man's jaw tightened. For a moment, Emma thought he might yell at her, tell her to leave. Instead, his shoulders sagged, and he looked suddenly older than he had moments before. He never showed me those pictures, he said, and the words came out broken. They stood there in the silence, two people who'd loved the same soul in completely different ways. Emma could see it now, the same shape of Daniel's eyes, the same line of his jaw. This man had lost his son, and grief had made him into someone who built walls instead of bridges. He talked about you too, Emma offered gently. He said you were harder on him than anyone, but that's because you cared. He knew that. Even when he was frustrated, he knew. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. The man looked at her then, really looked, like he was trying to see what Daniel had seen. What's your name? Emma. Emma Clark. Richard Morrison. He extended his hand, formal, uncertain. Emma shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm. A businessman's hands, but hands that had worked for what they had. I come here every Tuesday, Richard said finally. I didn't know anyone else did. I come Saturdays, Emma replied. After my shift. They stood together as the sun broke through the clouds, warming the cold marble between them. Neither of them knew what came next, but something had shifted. Some door had cracked open. Richard called her 3 days later. Emma was wiping down tables at the diner when her phone buzzed, an unknown number lighting up the screen. She almost didn't answer. Emma, this is Richard Morrison, Daniel's father. Her heart stumbled. Mr. Morrison, is everything okay? I need to ask you something. His voice sounded strained, like he'd been wrestling with himself. Did my son ever mention why he was at your diner so much? I've been thinking about it. He had money. He could have eaten anywhere. Emma set down her rag, moving toward the back where it was quieter. I think, she said carefully, he was looking for somewhere he didn't have to be anyone. Where he could just be Daniel. The silence on the other end stretched so long Emma thought the call had dropped. I made him miserable. Richard's voice cracked. I spent so much time pushing him toward what I wanted that I never asked what he needed. And now I can't take any of it back. Emma's eyes burned. She knew this kind of pain. She'd felt it when her own mother died 2 years ago, all the unsaid words piling up like stones in her chest. Mr. Morrison, he loved you. He really did. He told me once that he wished he was brave enough to tell you the truth, but he was scared of disappointing you. That's not hate. That's love. She heard him breathing, unsteady, raw. I found a box in his room yesterday. Photographs. Hundreds of them. He was, God, Emma, he was so talented. And I never once told him I was proud of him for it. He knew you loved him, Emma said, and she meant it. That's what matters. Love doesn't always sound like the right words. Sometimes it sounds like worry, like pushing. It still counts. Have you ever faced something like this? Share your story in the comments. ***. Would you? Richard started, then stopped. Started again. Would you come to my home? I want to show you something. I think Daniel would have wanted you to see it. Emma's first instinct was to say no. What business did she have in a billionaire's home? But something in his voice, the naked grief, the need to connect with someone who'd known his son, made her pause. Okay, she whispered. When? Saturday, after your shift. I'll be there. That Saturday, Emma stood in front of the Morrison estate feeling impossibly small. The house looked like something from a magazine. Tall windows, manicured gardens, a fountain in the circular driveway. Richard met her at the door himself. No staff, no pretense. Thank you for coming, he said. He led her through hallways lined with art, past rooms that echoed with emptiness despite their elegance. Finally, they reached Daniel's room. Richard opened the door like it hurt. The room was frozen in time. bed made, desk organized. But covering every wall were photographs. Stunning, heartbreaking, beautiful photographs.
Thanks, much appreciated.
Strangers' faces. City streets. Light breaking through windows. A waitress pouring coffee, caught mid-smile. Emma's breath caught. That's me. He saw beauty everywhere, Richard said quietly. Including in people others might walk right past. Emma moved closer to the photograph. She'd never known Daniel had taken it. Never realized he'd seen her that way, as something worth capturing, worth remembering. I'm putting together a gallery show, Richard said, of his work. I want the world to see what I was too blind to notice. And Emma, his voice grew firm, purposeful. I want to help you go back to school. Daniel told me in a letter I found. He said you had dreams you'd given up on, and he wished he could help. So I will. For him. Emma couldn't speak. The offer was too big, too overwhelming. Scholarships. Tuition. Books. Richard Morrison was offering her a future she'd locked away in the part of her heart reserved for impossible things. I can't accept that, she finally managed. It's too much. It's not nearly enough, Richard replied. His eyes were red-rimmed but steady. My son saw something in you worth believing in. The least I can do is honor that. Besides, and here his voice softened, I think helping you might be the only way I can still be a father to him. Emma's tears came then, hot and relieving. All the grief she'd carried alone, all the guilt for caring about someone whose world was so different from hers, it poured out in that beautiful, broken room surrounded by Daniel's vision of the world. Richard didn't tell her not to cry. He just stood there, present, two people sharing the weight of loss together. I miss him, Emma whispered. So do I, Richard answered. Every single day. The gallery show opened 3 months later. Emma stood in the crowd wearing a dress Richard's assistant had helped her pick out, feeling out of place and perfectly at home all at once. Daniel's photographs lined pristine white walls, each one a story, a moment, a piece of his soul. Critics came. Collectors came. But Richard had insisted the first people through the doors were the ones Daniel had photographed. The homeless man who played harmonica on 5th Street, the flower vendor with arthritic hands, Mrs. Chen from the diner, and Emma. This one's my favorite, Richard said, stopping beside her in front of the photograph of Emma pouring coffee. He called it light in ordinary places. That's what you were to him. Light. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Emma smiled through fresh tears. He was that for me too. That night, after the crowds had gone and the gallery lights dimmed, Richard handed Emma an envelope. What's this? She asked. Acceptance letter. Full scholarship. You start in the fall. Emma opened it with trembling hands. State University. Literature program. Everything she'd dreamed about but never dared to reach for. Thank you, she breathed. Thank you for seeing me. For believing. Thank you, Richard replied. For loving my son. For showing me who he really was. They walked out of the gallery together into the cool night air, two people forever changed by the young man who'd brought them together. Emma thought about Tuesdays at the diner, about Daniel's smile, about how one person's kindness could ripple out farther than anyone could measure. She'd go back to school. She'd study hard. She'd make something of herself, not because she had to prove anything, but because Daniel had believed she could. And every Saturday, she'd still visit that grave. But now, sometimes, Richard would be there too. 2 years passed like turning pages. Emma graduated with honors, her literature degree opening doors she'd only imagined before. She got a job at a small publishing house, reading manuscripts, helping new voices find their way into the world. The work was hard but satisfying, each story a small act of bringing light into ordinary places, just like Daniel's photographs had done. The diner closed down eventually, bought out by developers building luxury condos. Emma went there on the last day, standing in the empty space where she'd spent so many early mornings. She could still smell the phantom scent of coffee, still hear the clatter of dishes and the murmur of familiar voices. Mr. Henderson had retired to Florida. Mrs. Chen had moved in with her daughter. Everyone scattered, carrying their memories with them. But some connections deepened instead of fading. Richard Morrison became something like family. Not a father. Emma's own father had passed when she was young, and that space was sacred. But a mentor, a friend, someone who understood what it meant to carry love for someone who existed now only in memories and photographs. They had dinner once a month, sharing stories about Daniel, keeping him alive between them. "He'd be so proud of you," Richard told her over coffee one evening. He was grayer now, but steadier, like he'd finally made peace with the parts of himself that grief had shattered. "I hope so," Emma replied. "I think about him every time I read a beautiful sentence. Every time I help a writer find their voice. He helped me find mine." The gallery had become permanent, Daniel Morrison's photographs a gift to the city. Richard donated all the proceeds to scholarship funds for young artists, kids who dreamed bigger than their circumstances allowed. "For the ones who need someone to believe in them," he'd said at the dedication ceremony. Emma went to the cemetery less often now, but when she did, she brought flowers and sat in the grass like old times. She told Daniel about her life, the job she loved, the tiny apartment she'd decorated herself, the man she'd started dating who worked at the bookstore and made her laugh. Simple things. Good things. "I made it," she whispered to the marble stone.
Thanks,
"You
much
gave me the
appreciated.
courage to try, and I made it." The wind rustled through the trees, warm and gentle, and Emma let
There you go.
herself
Let me know if you
believe
need
Daniel
anything
could
else.
hear her.
Thank
That
you, that's
somewhere,
very kind.
somehow, he knew what his kindness had become. She'd learned something in those years since losing him. Grief doesn't disappear, but it transforms. It becomes softer. It makes space for gratitude. Every time she helped a young writer believe in themselves, every time she chose kindness over indifference, every time she saw beauty in ordinary places, she was living the lesson Daniel had taught her. That night, driving home with the windows down and music playing softly, Emma felt the kind of peace that comes from knowing you've honored someone's memory not with tears, but with becoming. She wasn't the exhausted waitress anymore, wondering if her life would ever be more than aching feet and early mornings. She was herself, fully, finally, someone who'd been seen, believed in, and given the chance to bloom. And she carried Daniel with her. Always. If you enjoyed this story, please like,
There you
share
go.
your
Let me know if
thoughts
you
in the
need anything
comments,
else.
and subscribe
Thank
for
you,
more.
that's very kind.
Thank you for spending your time with us today. Asterisk asterisk. The stars were bright as Emma pulled into her parking spot. She sat for a moment, looking up at them, thinking about how light travels vast distances to reach us, how sometimes that light comes from stars that no longer exist but still shine in our sky. Daniel was like that. Gone but still illuminating her path, still warming the cold spaces. She smiled, whispered a quiet thank you to the universe, and walked inside to the life he'd helped her build.